So the Men of the Great Assembly, as we pause now on each one of the recipients of the transition, we learn some of their favorite sayings and some of their favorite teachings. And the Men of the Great Assembly, these are the 120 sages at the time of the beginning of the Second Temple, who reestablished many of the fundamental structures of Judaism after the exile. And they had three teachings that they wanted to pass down to us. The first one was to be deliberate in judgment. The second was to raise many students. And the third was to make a fence for the Torah. Well, we want to understand why it was they who actually offered these teachings, but let's start with the first one, the idea of being deliberate in judgment. Two reasons that are given for being deliberate in judgment. The first is that if courts are too hasty in the way in which they arrive at their conclusions, then they're going to be overturned by the higher court, or others are going to be it's going to lead to conflictual situations with everybody disagreeing with what they consider to be a stupid judgment. And the result of this is that the judgment goes on and on and on and on, and ultimately it leads to a diminution of the authority of the courts. The courts are belittled because you see them fighting with each other, arguing with each other, every court overturning that of the previous court. In other words, get it right the first time. And to get it right the first time, just spend a bit more time, be very careful and be very deliberate in the way in which you arrive at the judgment. But the second reason that's given is something which is actually quite, in a sense, unique to Jewish law, but something which happens in any event, even in secular law. And that is that the reason for being deliberate in judgment is in order to be able to give time for a compromise to be arrived at. And as a matter of fact, the Beth Din are actually required to seek compromise before they actually enter into judgment. Deborah, nice to have you with us. I actually made a mistake on Shabbat because I thought that I had the dates wrong, and I thought that your site for your brother was on Shabbat, which is when I announced it. But in fact, it is today, Pesach ben Baruch. Amazing that we have you, and on my screen just above you, Sue, and the tile above you, Sue's has your site for a sister, and you have your site for your brother. Unusual to have two siblings, for young people. I'll come back to you just a moment. I want to ask you about your brother, but let me just finish this thought over here. So the idea of a judge can settle a matter to the satisfaction of all parties in his private chambers if he is careful enough and takes enough time over it, rather than reaching immediately for a decision. And that is actually the requirement of the Beth Din. And it's only when the Beth Din find that they can't actually bring the parties together in some form of compromise, then they actually have to resort to a judgment in which one party is going to win and the other party is going to lose. But in a compromise, you either say both parties win or both parties lose a little bit, but everybody gets something out of it. Isaiah says that about Jerusalem, she was filled with justice, and righteousness lodged there. And the expression lodged means that it sort of hung around for a while before it was actually issued. In other words, judges never made a judgment without sleeping on it overnight. Of course, what we take from all of this is that sometimes we are a little bit too hasty in our own judgments, and we shoot our mouths off. And had we just been a little bit quieter and withheld ourselves and slept on the matter overnight, we just might find a better way to deal with our hurt feelings, or the insult, or the perceived insult, or whatever it is. So just being a little bit more careful and less hasty in the way in which we snap back, most times the people that we actually love, for some strange reason. It makes a very big difference. Just zip your mouth, think about it overnight, sleep on it, and the following morning you'll discover that some of the fire has gone out of your belly, and you feel in a much more conciliatory mood. And that is the idea of being deliberate in judgment. Don't be too hasty to judge another person. It would make the world a much better place, in fact.